Many workers, like those in restaurants, are happy with the rise in the minimum wage this week. Some employers are not. Supervisor Nathan Fletcher has big plans for major improvements to county mental health services in the coming year. And San Diego City Beat as we knew it is no more. We'll look at what happened. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, KPBS reporter Priya Sridhar, former San Diego City Beat editor Seth Coombs, and Charles Clark, who covers county government for the San Diego Union-Tribune. Well, the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009, the longest stretch without a raise since the law was enacted in 1938. House Democrats passed a bill in July raising it to $15 an hour, and that was, of course, DOA in the Republican Senate. But many states, including California, are stepping up. And Priya, start with the minimum wage increase taking place this week and who's affected by it.
That's right. So companies that have 25 or more employees, their minimum pay level is going up to $13 an hour. For companies or businesses that have fewer than 26 employees, they are now required to have a minimum wage of $12 an hour. And this is part of a state law that was enacted back in 2017. And ultimately, the goal is to get the minimum wage up to that bill that you mentioned that the Democrats passed in the House and get the California minimum wage at least up to $15 an hour. So it's slowly but surely getting bumped up every year.
Yeah, and that's happening in a lot of states, right?
Correct, yes.
Not quite half the states, but I think about 20 states where it's slowly trying to edge toward that magic $15 number.
Yeah,
right?
They don't want to obviously do this overnight, but even a dollar increase, we're going from $12 an hour to $13 an hour for those bigger businesses, $11 to $12 for the smaller ones. For businesses that, are really pinching pennies here, they're saying that it's hitting them pretty hard, actually. And
we're going to get to that in just a minute, but remind us, when does this all take effect? When does it, gradually get to it's over several years yet.
Right, yeah. So it started in 2017, and that was back when the minimum wage was $10 an hour. And by January 1st of 2023, that's when we're going to see across the board, regardless of the size of your business, the minimum wage will be $15 an hour. Okay.
And the law has, as we're noting, has been controversial. You interviewed two business owners for reaction this week with different takes. First, we're going to hear from Corbin O'Reilly. Tell us what kind of business he has.
So he has a barbecue company. He has a catering business, which he's had for about 6 years. And then he also opened up a storefront in the College area that's just turned 2 in November. He started out with about 3 employees, and now I think he's up to about 15. So he's below that 25 employee threshold. So he's going to have to raise his minimum wage to $12 an hour. And so, yeah, let's take a listen to what he had to say.
It really impacts our bottom line. We have so much overhead built in around the restaurant, and just any little thing, this adds on, especially if you're working a longer event, a cater event, and overtime kicks in as well. So these types of things just kind of weigh down the business.
But not all folks feel that way or in the restaurant business. You talked to also the owner of Ponce's Restaurants. Who's he and how's that different from Corbin's?
Right. So he owns 2 Mexican restaurants. One is in Kensington, and it's been open for about 50 years. And then they just opened up a second location in northern San Diego. And so all together, so one restaurant has 26 employees, the other one has 31. So either way, they're above that 25 employee threshold. So they're going to have to raise their minimum wage up to $13 an hour. But yeah, he definitely had a different point of view from Corbin.
All right, let's hear that.
It's going to mean that our employees who make minimum wage get an extra $1 an hour, which is nice because the cost of living in San Diego is really, really high. A lot of folks who work for minimum wage cannot afford to live near where they work. And unfortunately, that includes where I run my restaurants.
Well, he segues nicely into my next question, which is that minimum wage. I mean, even $15 an hour, you're not going to get rich in San Diego on that.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, we all know the cost of living here is one of the highest in the country. And I think some recent studies, I believe it was MIT's living wage calculator, found that you have to make $14.61 an hour for a single person to make ends meet in California. And then that number goes up for a working couple with 2 children. That number increases to $19.48 each per hour. So obviously that's higher than what the minimum wage is here. But I think what's interesting in, listening to both Corbin and the guy from Ponce's restaurant is that, essentially the guy from the Mexican restaurant is saying that, everyone should make a living wage so that they can afford to live closer to their place of work and be able to afford the cost of living. However, Corbin, on the other hand, is like, I'm just trying to keep my doors open here. And, if I have to increase the minimum wage, then I might have to lay people off. And so that's kind of the debate that we end up seeing on the national level between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to the minimum wage.
Right, and I want to get to more of that in a second, but we did talk recently on the Roundtable about AB 5, new California law affecting quote, gig workers and forcing employers to pay full-time wages and benefits. And Seth, that impacts many freelance journalists, and how has that impacted cutbacks on at San Diego City Beat, which we'll get to more in
Sure.
later.
That was something that I was fearful about when it was first trying to get through the state legislature. And as we all know, they're trying to basically they were trying to basically cut down on gig work and kind of combat the gig economy. So there was a lot of people. It was mainly directed towards Uber and Lyft and rideshare companies like that. So, but unfortunately,
the idea is not to shortchange workers.
Sure,
make
absolutely, make them employees
right.
as opposed to just having them do these gig jobs
right.
on the side. And you have people with 3 part-time jobs as opposed to 1 full-time job.
Yeah, less pay,
so,
not full benefits.
As far as how it affected journalists, there are a lot of people who are. I'll give you an example. So City Beat did have weekly columnists, right? And they're happy being freelancers. There's one in particular that wrote for multiple myriad publications. So her job is directly affected by that because, again, she has a weekly column at City Beat. That's now capped at, I believe, 32 submissions per year for a publication.
So that's it.
Yeah, and you're starting to see the impact of it already. There are people, freelance journalists based in California, who are getting these letters from companies that they work for who are based in New York or Arizona or wherever saying, we can no longer use you because of this new law.
So the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And what you were mentioning, Republicans generally don't favor raising the minimum wage. The argument is jobs will be lost. But research shows that that hasn't been the case. There's been a lot of real-time research now in various states.
Right, yeah. And actually looking through all of this research in preparation for the show is kind of hurting my brain because there really isn't there isn't a lot of statistically significant, I guess you can say, research that backs up those Republican claims that, more jobs will be lost if we raise the minimum wage. The Congressional Budget Office did do an analysis recently. They hadn't done one since 2014, and they found that raising the minimum wage to the $15 level, like the Democrats had proposed nationally, would lift the earnings of 27.3 million workers, they said, but lead to approximately 1.3 million jobs lost. However, each of these studies that I looked at, I really tried to, use a magnifying glass here and see, how can you attribute that exactly to the minimum wage raise? And it was really difficult to do that. One, top journal published a report that said that the minimum wage, hadn't destroyed jobs by making workers too expensive. Mm-hmm. So really, it was difficult to find anything that was, in my opinion, scientifically, this is definitely causing jobs to be lost. Right. So I think that's what makes it politically confusing when these...
It does seem to be like a situation where it does have pros and cons, right? So, Seattle was one of the first cities that raised their minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And what they're seeing now is a lot more part-time jobs. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of people who are working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So you're starting to see a lot more part-time jobs, but they're getting paid more. And one of the other tricky things is they found that the minimum wage hikes don't, really keep up with inflation or the with San Diego's housing costs, going up 2% a year. Right. Is that minimum wage going to keep up with that?
Well, we're out of time on this, but lots of places across the country and lots more empirical data to go through as we move forward. Well, we're going to move on. Democrats have been rarely seen nor heard on the San Diego Board of Supervisors over the past quarter century. But Nathan Fletcher is changing that in a hurry. After winning a seat by 30 points over Republican Bonnie DeMantis in 2018, Fletcher made a number of headlines in his rookie year on the board by pushing a progressive agenda. His central issue, a huge investment in mental health services offered by the county. And Charles, this was Fletcher's key message during the campaign. Why is he so passionate about this one?
I mean, I think there's obviously a personal level. You just look at his background and how he came up. I know his mother actually worked in shelters and things like that, although that focused more on, spouses of domestic abuse and things like that. But I think more, definitively what he always points to is the severity of the challenges today kind of mandate that we go this direction.
We've got to do it because of what's happening in our society in this city and county.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, there was a big jump in spending on mental health in the budget adopted last year. Break down the specifics. More staff positions, more beds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we saw the budget actually bump the Health and Human Services budget 7%. So that bumps it up to about $2.26 billion annually. A lot of that focuses on behavioral health services in particular, where they actually had a huge staffing increase, adding 136 positions, a lot of which are at the Edgemoor facility and the county psychiatric hospital.
And Fletcher's big project involved the old county-owned building at 3rd Avenue in Hillcrest.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one.
So that was kind of the crown jewel, and I think really probably the biggest thing he points to this year that going forward will make the most lasting difference. He came up with this idea this property was going to essentially be turned into luxury condos, was kind of the plan. And instead what the county has now opted to do is they've partnered with Scripps and UC San Diego, and they're turning this into a regional health hub, regional mental health hub in particular. So they'll add 60 psychiatric beds, a litany of services, and a ton of other things. And a lot of people regard it as the game changer. It's like a $110 million to $115 million facility.
And it's unusual because it's a cooperative effort. You've got the county and then you've got these private hospitals involved, right?
Yeah, and I think when you talk to a lot of people, that's probably what's the most, encouraging thing about it is, so much of the issues we see now comes from people operating in silos. And here you have a thing where everyone got to the table and they're doing this now going forward.
This is a big win because they've generally been very fiscally, the Board of Supervisors has been very fiscally conservative when it comes to that, not only the budget but the reserves that they have on hand.
Almost hoarding money.
Yeah. I often compared Diane Jacob to Scrooge McDuck many times. So
So it's changing. Now, the plans for 2020 regarding mental health initiatives, Fletcher has some other things on tap.
Yeah, so when I spoke with him a bit, just kind of recapping the year, just given how active it was and kind of looking ahead, he's like, it continues to be mental health is the number one priority, which I think will help here is that seems to be the universal agreement among board members. You mentioned Supervisor Jacob, who I know also similarly noted and now is very open about admitting times have changed, we need to do this. Specifically when you look at what Supervisor Fletcher wants to do, he really is looking more at the point of entry, the system. So, he talks a lot about how, police officers are often the first line called when people are in mental health crisis. He really wants to establish kind of far-reaching mobile outreach teams, as well as add care coordinators who work with a person on an ongoing basis throughout their entirety of their experience in the system, which that would be huge. And then the other big component, which I have a feeling will probably be the most challenging, is data sharing, is getting hospitals, the county sheriff, and all these guys on the same board to share information.
So, we see stories on this, we talk about it on shows like this, but I think the residents, they want to see improvements and positive change. And what impacts do you think, if this is all going to work, where we're going to see it in the street level and the neighborhood level?
Right. So, I think with these guys, where they'll monitor is, looking at homeless counts, people who are actually receiving services. I think the problem with something like this, and probably part of the reason that it's not an appealing election issue for a lot of people to campaign on, is, these are long-term solutions. We really aren't going to see the actual, I think, dramatic change for many, many years. When you talk to Supervisor Fletcher, he talks about, ultimately this is something 20, 30, 40 years down the line you want to look back on and say, wow, we really changed the game here.
Incrementally changing human behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a long game, a lifelong game. And Steph, why do you think Nathan Fletcher's been able to accomplish so much? The few Democrats we've had here really didn't make that kind of impact that we're hearing about.
I think he does have a very bipartisan kind of outlook. And
used to be a Republican.
That's what I was just about to point out. Absolutely. Thanks for stealing my thing. No, I was kidding. No, but he has relationships with a lot of people, and he really does, care about, I would say slightly more left or progressive issues, and I think that he's done a good job in the regard that he's found a way to get, again, a slightly more, I wouldn't say slightly, a fiscally conservative board of supervisors, county board of supervisors that has, been a little tentative about these things. And there was a lot of mistakes that I feel like they had to learn the hard way. I mean, there was the Hep A, and then there's the ongoing issue with the county jails. And I think that he kind of maybe edged, in there and just said, like, hey, like, this is a good thing. This will help with everything.
Right. Charles?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I'd add to that, it's just the changing of the board overall is you add term limits, Supervisor Jacob, Supervisor Cox, they have stuff they want to get done, and the time's ticking here. So when they start thinking about their legacy and things, I think that helps make them more active. And then also it can't be understated just the fact that, Fletcher and Jacob in particular hit it off almost instantaneously, I think, to everyone's surprise. Yeah. So.
And Fletcher has some other things besides his big push on mental health care.
Right. So he took over as chair of MTS just in the last few months. So he'll be, very much in the transit fight and kind of the future over what that's going to look like here in San Diego. He did a lot of things related to the environment. As far as, air pollution standards and things like that. And those will continue to be top issues as well. And then child welfare being one of the biggest that I think we'll probably see more activity on.
And the election year coming up, we're going to see some more change on the board?
We will. So, definitively 2 seats will change because 2 supervisors are termed out. Supervisor Cox will leave his seat in the South Bay. That seat's going to go to a Democrat. Then Diane Jacob will leave her seat in East County. Yeah. Yes, and that'll probably be Republican again. Right. And that kind of leaves, the big seat being Supervisor Kristen Gaspar, and there's already millions, a lot of money being poured in, in the fight over that seat.
The swing seat. Completely different, though, from just a few years ago.
I'm very curious as to see how Kristen Gaspar sort of pivots back to, a more centrist kind of outlook as opposed to when she was running for the House of Representatives, when she was a little bit more go Trump kind of.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of interesting because the sense I'm kind of getting is that she's just frankly not. I think a lot of people, they look at it, you talk to the union guys or whatever, and it's like, look, all that's out there. It happened.
Yes.
She can't run from it. And I think instead for her, it's, trying to focus more on those pocketbook issues. Obviously, she was really involved in the Sandag transit fight. I think things like that are probably where you'll see her focus a lot more and try to skew away from the national conversation.
Well, as we've said before, the city government tends to get a lot of the spotlight and all, but counties got more money, bigger, and spotlight may be shifting this year. We'll see. Well, we're going to move on. Our next story, sadly, is hardly news. 2019 saw the further erosion of local newspapers in America. It's a trend that's been accelerating for almost 20 years since the newspaper revenue model was smashed by the internet. Local papers still do vital reporting. The exposure of Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes by the Miami Herald is a powerful example. But the demise of local coverage continues with a local example in San Diego City Beat. And Seth, this story, of course, is personal for you. Start with the sale of City Beat a few months back and what that meant for you and your colleagues.
Oh, obviously, like when we got the news, we were a little tentative about how things would go. And, there was a good reason for that because it's important to point out that Southland Publishing owned, before the sale, 5 papers all around Southern California. When it was sold to a Tempe-based company, we were a little worried, and then the axe came down about a month later, and I was let go along with a host of other writers and editors across all the papers in Southern California. And it was personal because it hurt and it was not cool.
And how would you characterize City Beat and the tradition of City Beat in recent years in the coverage?
It's a progressive left-leaning, somewhat alt weekly. I sometimes skew away from the word alt these days, the prefix alt, because it has the alt-right and stuff like that. But it's it was always something that, like, we were covering the stories that hopefully you might see. Again, when it comes to arts, politics, music, whatever, we were covering those things before, the UT maybe caught on to them or whatever. And that's no offense to the UT. They did great work, but we were just, that was what we wanted to cover, the people in the stories that people weren't covering.
And more edgy, maybe more subjective, and a little more cutting-edge insider view. That's what you were striving
for. Yeah, absolutely. More irreverent as well, and humorous at times, as far as like when all the coverage, politics, arts, whatever the case may be, we wanted to have an edge.
In the situation now, how would you characterize that publication now? Though the name is the same.
The name is the same, and that's basically it. That's all I can say is that, like, there's no political coverage anymore. Most of the content is farmed out of their base in Arizona. The office has since closed in North Park. I think they have a small, tiny little office in Mission Valley somewhere. Who's there? Not sure. There's only basically one person left locally on staff. Everybody else has either been let go or left.
So completely different, as we're saying, for what it was. And explain just personally what it meant to be part of a weekly with that tradition of casting a critical eye and kind of a muckraking, and it goes a long tradition in journalism, goes back to the 1800s at least.
I mean, personally,
pamphleteers, if you want to get that far back.
Yeah, I mean, since it began in, I believe, 2002, I moved here in 2000 and I was in school, and I saw that weekly. I picked it up. And you know, this is discounting all the multiple national awards they won for, you know, their coverage, their investigative journalism, their arts coverage. I saw it and I loved it and I wanted to write for it. You know, personally, like it's tragic to me because I was so invested in it. I tell this story about, you know, how I saw the music editor at the Casbah and I approached him and said, I want to write for you. And, you know, after that, you know, over the years, I moved up, and then I left a few times and came back. But that
was the nature of the beast.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a conventional job with a big city paper that a lot of us went through.
Yeah, absolutely. And you point out something that, like, this is an ongoing trend in the news business, in the journalism business. So when something like this happens, it's not surprising, but because it has changed so drastically, because as I feared that they were going to start not doing local coverage, and like they do little events coverage and things like that, but you know, to not have like a local staff, to not have you know that kind of commitment to investigative journalism and arts coverage, it's a tragedy. Well,
as we said at the open here, it's a trend that stretches across American journalism. We got a soundbite here from a veteran journalist, Charles Sennett, recently on the PBS NewsHour. He's now founder, CEO of the Ground Truth Project. That's a nonprofit media organization, trains and places reporters in local newsrooms. Let's hear that.
When we lose 30,000 reporting jobs, as we have in the last 10 years, what we lose is an ability for us to have a shared set of facts on a local level, and for us to have a civic debate on a local level. And I think we're really seeing a fraying of communities as a result.
Well, as he points out, Seth, we've just lost something. San Diego has lost something here, and it's maybe not noted in the first day or the first week, but as time goes on, this voice is silent now.
Right. It's also worth pointing out that they recently switched over website companies, and in the process of that, they expunged or got rid of the vast majority of content from the past, 2 decades.
So the archives isn't readily available anymore.
It's not available anymore. Like if you were to look up, like Kelly Davis, for example, and Dave Rowland did amazing
Been
work
on the
when
show,
they were
both
there.
of them, yeah.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
So just recently. So their work that they did, the award-winning work that they did there is no longer, you can't find it anymore. You get a 404 error page. And then, I should point out that there are a number of organizations that have reached out to us personally to try and help us recover some of that content.
And Charles, I want to turn to the situation at the Union Tribune. I should say I was there 27 years as an editor and reporter. It's about 12 years ago now that I took a buyout, a lot of buyouts and layoffs over the years. We've had several different owners since then, but things seem to have stabilized now. Tell us about the owner and your sister paper, the Los Angeles Times, and what's going on.
Right. So we were acquired by Dr. Patrick Soon-Shung about it was a year. 2 years ago now. It's flown by. But, I think the immediate thing you started to see was obviously the cuts kind of came to an end. We've actually been hiring people. I know I was one of the first. Actually, I think if you look at our watchdog and kind of politics team, 3 of us immediately came on when, in the 3 or 4 months after he acquired the paper.
Filling openings plus adding a few new positions.
Exactly. And then, we've also added a few more positions. It's not like the massive growth you've seen at the LA Times where they're just hiring people nonstop. But it definitely, I think, adds a bit of security, in a sense that, you kind of have this direction going forward. And then I think the one thing I'd like to add, just because I know Seth brought it up earlier, is, I don't think it can be stated enough how damaging it is when you do lose local papers. I mean, like the UT is a big organization, but the fact is we all supplement each other and we all, make up for blind spots that aren't there, and we cover communities that otherwise aren't seen. So, whether it was City Beat or The Voice or iNewsSource or KPBS, or the UT, it's important that people, buy in.
Well, we should note that the staff is still a big American paper in a big American city, excuse me, but staff is down really hundreds of folks since, say, 15 years ago when a lot of us were there.
Right, yeah. I mean, if you even look at my position, I'm the county government reporter and the politics reporter. Those two could very easily be separate.
And used to be separate jobs.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, short time left. Seth, what are you doing now? Your colleagues now?
I'm freelance writing in an AB5 world, so we'll see how that goes. But in any case, there are a number of my colleagues have started their own websites. I do encourage people to read Ryan Bradford. His new website is Awkward SD. You can find it easily. He's doing a lot of the stuff that he did at the paper. He has a column called "Well, That Was Awkward," and he's doing a really cool thing. And then as far as me goes, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I'll encourage everybody, support local journalism,
Absolutely.
support websites, news sites. Please, a new year, make it a priority. Well, that wraps up, excuse me, another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Priya Sridhar of KPBS News, Seth Coombs, formerly with San Diego City Beat, and Charles Clark of the San Diego Union Tribune. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.